you're shooting the web, and you cannot put it over walls, obviously, because it'll stop on the first target it hits, whether that's a player or an object or a creep or whatever else. So it's harder to choose if you're in the middle of a team fight and a bunch of people are clustered up. It's harder to choose which target you want the web to go on, but it's better because, or it's better in other situations because now you can use this ability to chase people a lot more effectively because you can run on your web as you're shooting it, I believe, and it'll give you the movement speed. And then while they're running away, you'll still get the movement speed. So I think it's better for Arachne to be able to stick onto people, and it's also probably just easier to aim and choose which target. It's just easier to aim straight on. It's worse to choose which target you want it on. It'll be interesting to see if this changes Arachne that much, but I think it's an overall good change. I think it makes the web a lot. It just probably will feel better to use, especially for newer players. So overall, I think that's a good change. Aphrodite. Okay, this is my favorite change in the patch. Okay, and I'm not going to take any crap about Afro. I always wanted Afro to be a support. And her old passive, for those of you who don't know, was that she gives whoever she is linked to, I believe it was 30% of her magical regen, which TLDR is complete crap. It's probably was one of the worst passives in the game. Now this is a really good passive because if you're in a team fight, the more people around you, the tankier you are as Afro, which means you're harder to kill, which means that whoever you're linked to gets to be a hyper carry for longer. You're able to heal them more, you can give them immunity more with your ult, you can give them more damage increase with your kiss. You can slow people. You can knock away people more. If she lives longer, the longer Afro lives with her kit, she'll just snowball a fight alone because she does so much in a team fight. I think this is a really, really good change, and there's pretty much no negative to it because now the kiss provides 30% mana regeneration. So they took her old passive and put it onto her kiss, and then gave her a new passive that's incredibly strong. Afro could become insane, along with some other changes. Rod of Asclepius a few patches ago got buffed. That's a very good item now. Weakening Curse. I guess this is the time to go back to Weakening Curse. Weakening Curse actually got nerfed. So, I'll go to Chang'e as well. Scaling on the healing portion of this ability increased from 30 to 40%. Basically, Chang'e's heal has 10% more scaling. So, they just buffed 2 healers, and this is why I wanted to come back to Curse, is that after you buff 2 healers, you also nerf Weakening Curse, which is the most common, most accessible, and probably best counterplay to healing in the entire game. So, you buff 2 healers, and then you nerf this active. This leads to potential for a healing meta. And in the past, healing metas are very, very, very irritating to play against because it feels like they have no counterplay. I'll reference the most recent one. This is the one I know the most about because it's one I was playing competitive. Last year, from COG Invitational to Regionals in Season 2 in the fall, was when Hell was at her peak. And Hell was basically a first ban, first pick god for the entirety of that length because of a few things. They changed Weakening Curse. Weakening Curse actually used to have 100% healing reduction or something like that, maybe 90%, I forget what it was. They toned that down to 65%, and then they increased the amount that Hell healed. So those two changes in conjunction, or in combination, whatever you want to call it, it made Hell insane, and it brought us into this meta where if the other team had Hell, and you did not have Odin to directly try to counter her, you just lost the game. The other team would just snowball. They would win every single poke trade because if each team poked each other out to 50%, the team with the healer would heal up to like 75-80%, and then they would just have more health. They would win the fight. They would get the objective. They would snowball the game. Sieges were near impossible. Once they got ahead, and once they started snowballing, it was near impossible to defend against because when they sieged, if you poked them out, they would just heal all of it. And they could, like, the only counter to a healing meta is full burst. And by removing healing reduction from Curse and nerfing it, you're making it less likely that people can actually burst a healer down and kill them before they sustain a team fight. And that is just such an insane buff to healers that it could become another healing meta. And not only that, Rod of Asclepius is better than it has ever been, and it'll. I'd be shocked if a healing meta doesn't come about in the next couple weeks of this patch, at the very least. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'll address the negative points. I think the Afro change was very good. It gave her a useful passive. The Chang'e change was also good because neither of those gods have been played. Here's the problem, is that those changes alone would have been more than enough to have these gods see some play or at least be thought about. But that in combination with Curse could just make them overpowered, which is obviously never good. My overall thoughts on it are, I don't think it'll be as bad as the healing meta last year, because last year one of the problems was that you would start a team fight, each team would poke each other out, the team with the healer would win. That is not as much the case anymore, because now with meditation being in the game, you do have you can access sustain from any god. You don't have to be a healer to have sustain. Meditation was probably one of, if not the strongest relics behind Sprint in competitive play this season, and it still is very good. It didn't see any adjustment. So you can counter sustain with your own sustain, but that's not really a good counter. The counter should be by reducing their healing, and that's through creeping curse or weakening curse or just curse or whatever it's called. And they took some of that away. So I don't agree with that at all. But I think trying to change healers is a good thing. In terms of design-wise of the game, here's what I'll say about healing, is that in the past, Hi-Rez has run into a problem where you either buff the healing numbers when a god so much that they're insanely overpowered, like Hell was last fall, or you nerf the healing so much that Hell is just complete trash, and Hell was probably one of, if not the worst gods in the game this season, because they had to nerf her healing from last season. That is, okay, so that's why I think the Afro change is good. They didn't touch her healing at all. She heals the exact same way. They just gave her a better passive. So she'll still do her job as a healer, but her job as a healer isn't what defines her. She gives a lot of utility in her kit. She gives a hyper carry crowd control immunity. She gives them damage increase. She gives them healing. She gives them a slow to stick on people. That's the way a healer should be. A healer should be a utility, selfless god. That's why I like Afro a lot. That's why I always, if you guys follow me on Twitter, that's why I always bitch that Afro isn't a guardian, because she's useless as a mage and a soul laner in her previous iterations, but this gives her utility. This might have her get a chance to see play. The part about it that makes me upset is that she's going to see play, and she might be getting nerfed because she's a healer, because they nerfed Weakening Curse, where I think she only needed the passive, and she would have been fine. She didn't need a buff or a nerf. She didn't need a buff to her healing. She didn't need a nerf to anti-healing, and that was what made her cool, is that she was a god with a lot of utility in her kit. Chang'e, on the other hand, I hate this change because I like that Chang'e gets a change. I just think this is the worst one they could have made, because you're increasing her healing, which is just a snowball effect, which has less counterplay, especially after you nerf Curse, where it could just be insanely frustrating to play against, and that never feels good. I wish they would have given Chang'e utility like they did Afro, and not changed Weakening Curse, and healers would be viable, but not meta-defining. That's where you want them. You don't want any one god to be meta-defining, or completely shift the meta with their own viability. You just want them to have a spot in it, ideally. Ideally, you want every single god in the game to be viable in some team comp, in some situation. I think Afro would have been there, whether as a support or a mid laner or a soul laner or wherever else. I think Afro could have been there with her change. And Chang'e is, like, I don't know, TLDR, Afro's change could make her viable with utility and good god design. Chang'e's god change could make her viable with brute force, and that's not the way you want to make a god viable. That's my opinion on it. I think should healers be overpowered at the release of this patch, the instant change should either be a nerf to Ride of Asclepius or a buffed curse or a combination of both. But I'm very skeptical of how they're doing the healing. I love Aphrodite's change, hate Chang'e's. I'll go down to Hell. I think they changed Hell a little bit. I'll come back to those other gods. Uh, for those of you who don't know how Hell's passive works, she receives different bonuses whether she's in dark or light stance. They made the time for you, like, the time that it takes to get the full effect from those stances takes less time. The slow is increased, and her scaling on her Inspire, which is her heal, is now increased, I think, right? And the movement speed buff is increased, so I hate the hell when the Chang'e changes. You're making healers viable by brute force. I love the Aphrodite change because you're giving a healer the chance to be viable, not making them viable, I should say. You're giving Aphro the chance to be viable by just giving her utility. That's how utility is what makes the game fun. Utility adds counterplay. Utility adds skill caps to the game. Increasing a god's raw numbers just makes him feel like shit. That's why they had to nerf Alquang, because his raw numbers were so high that he would just one-shot people, and his early clear was so good that it was hard to punish him. That's why they had to nerf it, and then they kind of go against that way of thinking with Chang'e and Hell. So I'm very skeptical about those two, but I love Aphro, and I hate Creeping Curse, the change to that. Sorry, I had to drink some water. Okay. So I'll talk more about that at the end in the stream. I don't know if I'll upload that part afterwards, but Fafnir. Fafnir was slightly underpowered launch and will be getting some buffs to improve his abilities. Curse Strength is designed to be a high risk, high reward skill shot, so the stun duration is being increased to make this worth the effort. Additionally, Dragon Breath is receiving a damage increase to make it more intimidating and help Fafnir confirm skills. Also, all of Fafnir's dots in Dragon form have had their timing changed to apply damage on the initial hit for better readability. So, the Curse Strength change, really good, makes the stun a lot better, makes the stun a lot easier to follow up in a typical support sense. In the previous 1 second stun, it was pretty much a selfish stun. You would use it to self-peel, or you would use it to gap close, I guess. I guess gap close could be for your team too. But now, if you're on comms and ranked or competitive play or something, you could call out, like, hey, I have my stun, and then somebody could like aim a raw snipe and then trust that you hit it, kind of like they would with a Thor wall. You throw the stun, you stun them, they hit the raw snipe. There's a lot more team synergy that can be used with a longer stun, so I like that a lot. Damage over time in Dragon form now deals damage at 0 seconds, 1.5, and 3 seconds instead of 1, 2, 3. I guess that's just like not really an arbitrary change, but that's good, I guess. Damage over time from Dragon Transformation now deals damage at 0 seconds, 1.5, and 3 seconds instead of 1, 2, 3 again. So they're just changing out the spacing of his damage. And then they increase the damage of Dragon Breath, which gives you a reason to stay in your alt. Previously, the alt was very bittersweet because your abilities would all get augmented and they would have more potent versions. But you would be this huge model in a dragon, and you would be so easy to tank, or so easy to hit, and you would just tank a ton of damage and just die. So now you get rewarded a little more for using your alt. So I like the changes to Fafnir. I don't think it makes him any more of a support. It gives him a little more setup. It gives him a little more damage, but I don't know. I don't really play Fafnir much. I guess I should have asked Wubbin what he thought about all this stuff. I'm pretty sure they're all good changes, but I don't know if it makes him viable. I certainly don't think it makes him viable as a support. But as a solo laner, he could be pretty good, especially because Mark of the Vanguard did not get touched on, as you guys have saw. Guan Yu. Guan Yu is gaining a new set of powerful tools to apply different combat scenarios, but his passive is being adjusted to only proc when at full stacks. Guan Yu has been locked into the role of group healer in the past, but his new passive will give him more ways to influence the team fight other than just healing. So the new passive, Painless, each time Guan Yu deals or receives damage, he gains a stack. Stacks are gained from minions and gods. At max stacks, the next ability move will have a boosted effect. So max stacks increase from 20 to 30. So just in terms of playing the god, this is a much cooler passive. It increases his skill cap because now you can play around your passive. His passive feels more interactive as a player. You pay attention to it a lot more. You get to use it a lot more. You get to think about it a lot more. It adds a higher skill cap to Guan Yu's kit in general. And Passives feel really bad when they only interact with one part of the kit. Like, for example, Afro's passive was crap, because it only